So thank you very much. Thanks for the time and the opportunity to present with the Global River Centre. I'm going to be chatting about transitioning to a circular economy, looking at waste as a resource. I'm an executive member and country leader for South Africa for the African Circular Economy Network. And my focus really is about looking at developing resource efficient economies in Africa. So I'm going to try and go through a number of different components. First of all is really to understand, looking about transitioning to a circular economy. It's not just about recycling. The general perception of recycling is pretty naive. I think a lot of people think recycling is irrelevant or irrelevant. As you can see in the little picture there, there's a very naive view that we have that it's not about just arts and crafts and the odd little bits and pieces. We need to change our thinking in terms of how we look at the impacts and outcomes of waste as a resource, instead of recycling as a verb or an action. And that's where we need to look at changing the narrative. So how do we look at using waste as a resource where we can deliver social upliftment, where we can look at skills development, economic development? How does it impact and influence energy, water, wastewater, infrastructure, housing, manufacturing, food security, and specifically addressing issues around climate change adaptation and mitigation? So from my perspective, developing a waste economy allows us to achieve all of the SDGs. I think my last slide will show that there's about 15 of the 17 SDGs we can achieve through the waste economy. So in terms of project development, there's a lot of different components around looking at understanding it. So from growing green economies, we need to look at the elements around collection. So there's networking and enterprise development, there's cleanup operations, but then what do you do with that material? There's source separation, which has become the big buzzword, but then 40% of that material is unrecyclable. How do we develop local recyclers where we look at vertical integration of business models where they are not working with at the bottom of the value chain, but then growing their way through the top of the value chain? And how do we develop local markets and applications for these collected materials? So to be honest, recycling is not the nexus that we've all been talking about. A lot of the plastic producers will tell you it is the solution. But we need to look at changing the narrative and understand the opportunities in terms of the circular economy as to how that can help us to take it from this to the next step. So there's a number of ways one can look at it. The Global River Centres, when I first started chatting to the team there, I said, listen, there's a huge opportunity in terms of understanding circularity, but looking at the development of economic opportunities, skills development, and local sustainability and reliability using these particular centers. And that can be very simple. It can be looking at something like upcycling. There's a number of different applications for upcycling, and that brings in skills and development training. The pictures you see here are a project we developed using tire tubes, where we're producing high quality fashion bags and sports apparel. And there's a number of ways that one can look at the different skills development from this, not just looking at the physical skills, but also how do you start a business? How do you look at marketing your materials? And there's a whole host of different benefits that come out of this. On the e-waste side of things, there's a number of opportunities. And again, these centers, particularly if one looks at bridging the digital divide in Africa, issues around refurbishment and recycling are critically important. Many people can't afford a new computer, but there's a huge market in terms of refurbishment. I know that there's a lot of tertiary technical colleges that are pumping out IT students who can't find jobs. Yet there's opportunities in terms of looking at the development around skills and opportunities in refurbishment and getting the connectivity out to the people. Obviously, there's your typical sort of dismantling and refurbishment, but one can go to the higher level through applications such as hydrometallurgy or pyrometallurgy to look at the extraction of your rare earths and other precious metals. There are simple mechanical applications in terms of copper separation, aluminium separation. But then we can also look at developing different applications that look at all the problematic waste streams. The picture on the top left is a product that we developed using the ABS, or adenylene butadiene styrene, which is a plastic used in the housing of computers, which is traditionally just unrecyclable. And that can be converted into guttering systems and gutter elbows and gutter lengths. So there's a huge amount of opportunities in this for skills development. The Greenable project is also part of the Africa Footprints model that we looked at. It's a project that I helped to develop, which takes on disabled people to look at the refurbishment and dismantling from e-waste. Tires, there's also a huge number of opportunities. A lot of the projects that we've developed, the Tire Cycler project we developed, for example, in Nigeria, and that won an international award. It's basically how to debead or pull the steel out of the tires. And that can be done very efficiently using sort of small investments. I think that unit cost us $500 to make. Right up to your higher level, where one looks at innovative flooring. We design and develop this with the Van Dyke Carpet Group. But there's upcycling, as I've said, fuel alternative. Africa is hungry for fuel and energy. And then obviously pyrolysis and fuel oil extraction. So again, a multitude of applications for a problematic waste stream. But it's also about trying to look at collaborating and connecting. So when one looks at a circular economy, it's and this is what Footprints Africa have tried to do as well, is to get people to understand that it's not just about oneself. I've just embarked on a project now with the Dutch consulate to look at developing a circular business platform for the city of Lagos and the state of Lagos. And it's bringing together a collective to get people together, start looking at the different applications and how we can unpack all those different opportunities. So connecting is important. It's not just institutions and agencies, but it's also looking at applications. And there are some brilliant applications. There are some blockchain smart-based apps that create cashless transactions and opportunities for waste collection that creates full traceability. There's a number of different ways that one can develop that to start looking at driving the supply and demand within the waste market. But we need to look at different applications. So when we look at manufacturing, we've got the conventional sort of application wash plants. One would assume this would be your traditional mechanical recycling options like what we do for PET markets and HDPE. But there's, it's been touched on already in terms of the plastic lumber. Plastic lumber is done across Africa. I know of, I think, 8 manufacturers in South Africa alone who are producing plastic lumber. There's roof tiles that are made from compression molding with plastic and sand. And then, of course, small-scale pyrolysis, which is an opportunity for extracting energy from the different systems. And another application that was raised with the Footprints Africa is looking at the utilization of different waste resources to create structural outputs. So we've developed something called the ocean paver, for example, which mixes crushed glass and plastics to produce bricks, blocks, pavers, etc. And I'll touch on that later. So when we look at the materials, it's about also trying to understand how do we look at local. And this is a project that that I developed in South Africa. It's a compressed earth block technology, but we looked at diverting waste soils from landfill, particularly from cut and fill operations. The bottom picture there is Stellenbosch municipality in the Cape, where we utilized, I can't remember, I think it was 180 tons a month in terms of the different clay soils that were going onto the landfill site to produce over 300,000 blocks. The picture on the top right is a church we built in Shongweni in Natal, and this is a beautiful building medium. Here we're looking at a product that's a massive problem in landfills in terms of crushed builder's rubble or builder's rubble and soil waste. It normally constitutes about 35% of the waste in our landfills. And yet this can become a beautiful building medium that is cheaper and stronger than hollow concrete blocks. It's about 16% cheaper than hollow concrete, about 40% cheaper than clay brick. But it has a huge thermal efficiency, about 10 times the thermal efficiency of concrete. And it's a beautiful building medium to work with. So there's many different ways one can look at this. And the beauty of this, again, in understanding the global river centers, if you see the picture at the bottom, there's little mobile machines, and those can be situated anywhere. And those mobile machines use a waterless system using a diesel engine, so they don't need to be connected to the grid. They can be moved to any community where you can train people to understand, analyze soils, and manufacture bricks and blocks for local construction. The architect was discussing, for example, a steel frame. It's an ideal opportunity because it does circumvent a huge amount of issues in terms of the building suitability and engineering design. But then the fill-in could be compressed earth blocks, and the local community could manufacture that from local soils and local materials. So again, how do we bring these applications to the centers? So there's other different applications. Some of the stuff that we're developing, we've created building products from waste using fly ash, mine tailings, and slag. Geopolymers is of specific interest to us at the moment. We have designed and developed a number of different geopolymers, either solid or foamed geopolymer applications. Now this is using fly ash and slag, and essentially it's about 90% recycled materials. It has 90% less CO2 emissions than cement or concrete. Excuse me. And there's a number of different ways that it can be applied, not just in terms of foundations and walls, but there are tile adhesive systems, there are flooring systems, etc. The picture you see on the top right there is a modularized system where one looks at foamcrete, and again, the foam concrete. Again, a green economy application using far less material, but it achieves the thermal efficiencies like no other. And again, quick to build. One can put up a house in 4 days, literally pour the foamcrete into the molded system, remove the plates after 4 hours, and make the next house. So we want to look at different materials and applications that are going to make sense. But again, also to try and develop something where one can look at local skills and local skills development, where you're not just building the center, but then you possibly have the opportunity of being able to then continue with that technology, whether it's compressed earth or the concrete or the cladded type system, that now becomes a business with the local enterprises that they are now able to continue building homes and houses and other centers around that. So extending the skills development and looking at it from an enterprise development perspective. And there's a lot of benefits behind that. Again, what we don't want to do is we don't want a repeat of any sort of Eurocentric application where we are using European money to throw in a big infrastructure into the middle of Africa and hoping it's going to work. We've got to look at incorporation of the local communities, get them to create some sense of ownership and belonging to the thing. And that helps in terms of long-term sustainability as well. So this is not rocket science or research. This is full applications. Part of the Gautrain in South Africa were built with these materials. Most of the wind farms down in the Eastern Cape and Western Cape now, the foundations are being built with the geopolymer materials, again with almost a 92% reduction in CO2 emissions. And it can be used for virtually any application. Portside is a 117-story building that was built with geopolymer applications. So there's many different options in terms of looking at circular economy. Again, low carbon systems and developing applications. And then how do we look at the problematic waste fractions? So this is not a unique thing to Africa. The picture on the top left is the Citram River, Southeast Asia. The picture here that you see in the middle on the left is typical of anywhere in Africa at the moment, whether it's looking at the coastal areas or riverine areas or our settlements. Now, small-scale pyrolysis to me is a huge opportunity. This system you see here, I built with another one of my companies, and we used polypropylene and LDPE waste that had a low value to produce diesel, which we used for 6 months to run all of the infrastructure for the recycling center. And we were producing diesel around about 6 Rand a liter, which is about less than half the retail price. But then we had to design other components to look at the more problematic waste streams. We're developing systems for nappies at the moment, for example. But how do you take problematic waste streams like the multi-laminates and bring those into the pavers and retainers? Now, there's a lot of people doing pavers and retainers and blocks around Africa. Footprints Africa has picked up 1 or 2 of those. But the difference is that we're looking at systems where we look at the problematic waste. So what do you do with the stuff from your beach cleanups? How do we look at the problematic multi-laminate wastes and these sort of things? And glass, again, is a massive opportunity. Glass is such a beautiful medium. Busy working with government in South Africa at the moment, where literally glass recycling could create another 50 to 60,000 jobs, and create multiple applications, whether it's from flat glass or bottle glass. So we're looking at using it in plaster sand water filtration, the biggest application, where there are, again, massive opportunities because, first of all, you're not illegally mining sand from a local river that would be impacting your biodiversity and water yield, etc. But taking a non-recycled resource, there's very little recycling of glass happening in Africa, and make that into a medium that is more efficient than sand. It lasts 10 times longer. The flow properties are so good that it reduces the electricity usage of the pumps by 8% and maintenance costs by 20%. As well as your water filtration losses, your backwash losses by 23 to 26%. And then again, looking at local communities, we can show them with local geopolymers and applications how to create kitchen countertops, prepared surfaces, looking at cladding for different building materials. It can be used for industrial insulation to create a glass wall for insulated materials. It's a beautiful medium. And yet it is largely overlooked in Africa as a problem. We always keep thinking about the plastics. And then part of also what we see for the river centers is about self-sufficiency. So how do we look at making sure that we incorporate the communities, that the communities become the suppliers into that center? And there are beautiful, beautiful systems like the Mgibe system in South Africa, which is literally a raised bed gardening system. One can create 10 times the density of vegetables with about 10% of the soil requirements and 5% of the water requirements. And we can teach people in the communities to grow vegetables at home. And the importance of food nutrition is about health, it's about education, but it's also about self-sufficiency. How do we look at the organic wastes? In Africa, most of our solid waste, municipal solid waste, is organic in nature. And how do we look at converting that into compost and organic fertilizers, looking at vermiculture, creating biogas? Biogas can be used for cooking and processing. The biggest issue we have in Africa is food waste. A lot of the product doesn't get to market. And yet, if we look at the fact that we don't have energy and electricity, that is the biggest issue around cold storage chains and also processing. But if we convert those into juices, jams, pickles, these are products that have a much longer shelf life, they have a much higher value, and it creates incredible vertically integrated business models and economic stability. And it really is a simple system. And the Mgibe system that we're working with in South Africa works everywhere from the seedpreneurs. We teach the kids at school to become the growers of the seeds. So we get it through the education side, and also they become seedpreneurs. We take it to the grandmas and everything in the community, or we could take it into a larger scale type system with, again, very inexpensive infrastructure to create agricultural systems. So we were trying to avoid the large scale, extensive or expansive commercial applications, but then also hydroponics is expensive and it's complicated. So one needs to look at a sort of a blend between them. And as I said, Footprints Africa has talked about the issues around agri-protein and other components. And how do we bring all of that into the system so that we look at basically incorporating everybody into that? So really it's about evolution. It's about evolving from a linear economy. We're in about a chain economy at this stage, but then really getting that into a circular economy. And creating that evolution using waste into resources is an ideal opportunity, and Africa is the best place to be for that. So it's an issue of geometry. You know, we need to look at moving from boxes and silos, and that really is the mentality we have from a corporate and a public sector perspective, and move it into a place where we can start looking at circularity. And what that does is that aligns us to all of the different sustainable development goals. As I said, we can achieve 15 out of the 17 sustainable development goals, transitioning to a circular economy using waste as a resource. So it's a great opportunity. We need to make that happen, and I'm hoping that the global river centers will look at all the solutions and applications that we can use to drive Africa sustainably forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I actually, for a second there, I started, when I was listening to the presentation, I for a second forgot that I'm moderating and almost forgot to unmute myself. So thank you for that. That was incredibly insightful presentation. Thanks a lot. And we've got some incoming, people are super eager to ask questions to you, Chris, and we already have a few questions. First one coming from Rebecca. So the question actually goes, what methods can be used to safely collect the e-waste? Thinking of health hazards, etc. How is the collection organized? So if you can quickly give us some insight on that.
E-waste is an important one because, I mean, in South Africa and in most places, e-waste is considered as a hazardous waste. Now, the simple reality is that the only thing that's hazardous about e-waste for most of the part of it is that if you drop a computer on your foot. It's only really going to get hazardous when you start burning products to try and get wires out. And yet there are great systems, very inexpensive systems that can do that better. So we want to work with the likes of the World Resources Forum and the Secondary Resources Institute to look at better systems of being able to extract out purer metals that create better income for locals. The collection side of it really is not hazardous. It's only when you start getting into the processing, and that's what we want to try and avoid. We want to try and look at making sure that it's done in a viable manner, and that's where a lot of our training capacity building comes in to show what can be done. The reality is that if you look at the resources in Africa, we're probably only extracting a minor portion of that. We're missing the rest of it. We're not doing anything with the plastics or the glass. We're only focusing on the subgrade metal or the aluminium or the copper. Yet there is so much more that one can look at. So again, education, bringing in systems and technology and applications.
Okay, thank you. We got an okay from Rebecca, so I think that was a sufficient answer. Thank you so much. And then we have another one from Elizabeth, actually. And I can just read it out loud for you, Elizabeth. How is your network and projects organized and funded? So it's more of a management kind of question.
Yeah, but maybe specifying it, please, if I may allow, may I be allowed. At some point in the presentation, and thank you very much for that, it was really encouraging and very enlightening as well. At one point you say, I have built this system, or I've built this process with one of our factories, and your name of, or your wording of this made me think, how are you organized if there is a beautiful idea from Emma and Rebecca, for instance, that they would like to adopt, and we would like to set up this process in the Global River Center, and again acknowledging this idea that yes, for the use in that particular center, but making it a business afterwards for the community or for the youth that have been involved and so forth. But how are you engaging? If we wanted to engage with you, are you supporting with finances? I understand that you are training and capacity building, but how is your network working? If you get ideas from outside, because we don't want, as you mentioned, Europe don't want to, you know, pull in all our European ideas, and we don't want either to just roll out as an African regime. So how do we work locally with?
It comes back to the original discussion, I think, before the Zoom meeting started, when I was questioning you as an NPO, and you're going, we're not an NPO, we're a for-profit company. And that's also where, I mean, I've developed a number of different NPOs. I had one called Use It, which created 2,600 jobs in the Durban area. And the benefit of that in terms of looking at the waste development and diversion was a sort of a 1,500% return on investment from the funders. Now that's the idea that we're looking at. So a lot of it's going to be driven around the economic node. And I'm afraid that with my lack of hair, I can't grow a ponytail to be an environmentalist. So I drive things on an economic scale. And from economies, then your social and your environmental benefit. A lot of the projects that we drive and develop are done through different organizations. So what we did before as a non-profit organization, if we created a particular technology, we would then commercialize that as a new entity. So there's a number of entities that we work with. I'm director of, I think, 8 of them. So we've got the likes of the Pyrolysis Group, Sustainable Technologies, SDG Africa, Foamcrete, Arc Innovations. There's a whole host of different applications out there. Each of those is commercial by itself. The opportunity is in using the networks, and that's where it's vital to, through these sort of initiatives as well, is to work with Global River Centers, to work with Footprints Africa, United Nations Development. But again, we've got to drive things on a commercial perspective. So if you look at when I was chatting to Emma and Rebecca, when we first started chatting about this, is how do we look at creating not only sustainability, but economic viability in those centers? And I think if one drives that as an organization, there's an opportunity for you to help drive that, where these then become commercially viable centers of each, whether it's in manufacturing or I see that Farouk is here. I mean, you look at your makerspace type opportunity. There's the agri-protein, there's food, there's so many different ways of making money. How you're going to plan that, I think this is where the finances are quite easy. If you look at something like glass recycling, we're putting together a business model at the moment now, which shows that a large-scale glass recycling system that'll process 16 tons a day of waste could have a return on investment in under 4 months. And that really is about trying to create the markets. And that's working with governments, looking at ensuring supply and demand, material specification, green procurement, and looking at the supply chain issues. So one's got to work in with local partners and try and develop the entire framework, from financing to project development to market development.
We cannot hear you, Elizabeth. Oh, but you said thank you, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, both of you. I'm just gonna remind you that in the chat box you can now find the link to this session. So there is going to be another Google form where you can just leave all your further thoughts or comments or anything that you would like to give or kind of reconnect later on with the speaker itself. And I'm just gonna read out a message from Farag. I think that would be a nice conclusion to the end of this session, I think, as well. And Farag wrote that easy enough to answer for me. Collaborate, cooperate, and consult as to our local level. We are working in the areas we know our environments support us, which makes us the project sustainable and its true development lasts. So thank you, Farag. I think this was a perfect note to close this session on. Do we have time? I think we are going to have time for one more question if there is one. If not, we will go on to another part. Yeah. Is there a question, Agne? Yeah, we have one more question. Okay, I'm just going to read it out loud. It's a question from Agne, and she said, thank you very much for a nice presentation. You showed several buildings that were already built with your recycled materials. I'm just interested in how do you educate your customer to choose exactly that, and what are the price differences to choose the recycled materials versus old school concrete, etc.
I think the sad reality is, it's a very good question, because the sad reality is that the construction development market is really against alternatives and new systems. We have created a wall with the big cement companies and the big brick manufacturing companies, and anything to do with material specification or material standards is based around conventional materials. So getting alternative materials into the system is quite difficult. And unfortunately, what I found is that sometimes it's not worthwhile mentioning the green aspects of the product. If you're saving somebody money, they'll take it on. And that really is the best selling point. So there are some building materials that we've designed and developed which are more expensive. Things like wood plastic composites as an alternative to timber are way more expensive than products, wooden products for decking. But again, you've got to educate the user that it's going to last 10 times longer and it doesn't need the maintenance costs. With the stuff we're doing on road stabilization, with using geopolymers, we're showing that we've got about R500,000 saving per kilometer. The plastic roads we're developing also, again, the problem there is that we're about the same price as asphalt roads, but they last 5 to 6 times longer. So sometimes it's about looking at not just your price for price, but also your long-term maintenance costs and implementation costs. The compressed earth block, for example, the beauty of that is again a carbon issue. So the thermal efficiency of building with compressed earth is so fantastic that you don't need heating or cooling costs for a home for the duration of its lifetime. Yeah, they're beautifully warm in winter and cool in summer. So when you look at the heating costs, those are the issues we've got to look at, because the built environment contributes some 40% of all global emissions to climate change. And cement alone is an 8% contributor to that. I hate cement. Cement should be banned as far as I'm concerned. We can use waste materials and we can do it better. We can do it cheaper. Geopolymers are 30 to 40% cheaper than cement concrete, but you're dealing with an institution that has had 60 to 100 years to really tie down its market dominance, and that makes it difficult. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing, you know, it's really disruptive, and so I'm probably going to have to drive around in a bulletproof car for a while, but we've got to change.